face severe financial sanctions. We have details from an uncompromising letter written by the Americans to the finance minister. We also hear from the main opposition NDC, which is tonight demanding a forensic audit of PDS accounts.
We have stated time and again that this PDS issue is the biggest corruption scandal in the history of Ghana, and we shall be unrelenting in our demand for probity and accountability from the Akufo-Addo-led government.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Bond Savings and Loans. Your success, our passion. Vodafone, the future is exciting, ready. Gasem, the nation builder, and Antate Furniture, designed for life. John News has secured a letter from the United States Millennium Challenge Corporation threatening Ghana with sanctions unless we reinstate the PDS concession arrangement with ECG by 30th October. Government has already indicated its willingness to call the bluff of the Americans and proceed with the termination of the concession. But we are now beginning to appreciate how extensive the cost will be to Ghana in financial terms if we fail to comply with the terms of this particular letter that I will share with you shortly. This is happening on the day when the main opposition party has been addressing a news conference demanding a forensic audit into the accounts of the PDS. They are also objecting to government's stated plan of opening a tendering process through restrictive tendering to get a new arrangement for the concession. We have details for you on this from multiple angles, but let's start with the letter we've secured from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which tonight is spelling out in detail what the Americans want from Ghana as far as this concession arrangement is concerned. My colleague Joseph Akable is in the studio with details of this. Joseph, first, when was this letter written?
It was written on the 18th of October 2019 and it's addressed to the Honorable Minister Ken Ofori-Atta, Government of Ghana, Ministry of Finance. And so that is in terms of the details where it's heading to when the date was written.
And its heading is Principles and Action Steps to Move Forward on the Ghana Power Compact. And it states in summary what the summary is in terms of what they expect us to do when it comes to this. Let's go to the summary.
And so the first thing we learned from the letter is that there were a series of meetings that are taking place. We are told that it was held in New York from September 22 to 24, and then again on October 15 to 18. Now, this letter sets
These dates are very interesting. This is around the time that the president was also in New York with the United Nations General Assembly, and he went with a whole team, including the finance minister and other key individuals in government. In fact, if you read the finance minister's own letter,
it made reference to that meeting that are taking place.
Exactly. Now we know the specific dates: 22nd, 24th, and there was also
October 15 to
18th, all on the same
which
matter.
is on the very day that this letter was written, the last day, the 18th of October. So this letter sets forth as a summary of the principal terms pursuant to which government will reinstate the concession rights of Power Distribution Services Limited, PDS, as contemplated under the agreements governing the ECG PSP as in effect on the date thereof, namely the Lease and Assignment Agreement, Bulk Supply Agreement, and Government Support Agreement, and together with the LAA and the BSA, collectively the Transaction Agreements, into brackets, Concession Restoration, and 2, the general principles the government will follow in carrying out the concession restoration and facilitating a restructuring of the equity interest of PDS, into brackets, the restructuring. The terms used herein are defined in either the compact or in the transaction agreement. And so this letter says that after the meeting, they had agreed on steps to lead towards the return of the concession agreement and the various licenses that have been suspended. And so it proceeds to set forth the terms for which this is going to take place.
And then it goes out to state the general principles. And again, these are general principles as the Americans understood it to mean post the conversations with government and the finance ministry. First, and this is a line which the finance minister also agrees to in his letter in rebuttal, which is that both government and MCCE commit to the compact and the ECG PSP, and we know that is a private sector participation. So there's a general commitment to that.
Yes, and it goes on to say that the government also considers it necessary to strengthen significantly the equity participation capacity of Ghanaian investors in line with the principle of majority Ghanaian ownership. Because you know that this issue has also been topical about whether indeed the Ghanaian investors had the funds required to pump into the management of PDS. It goes on to say that in addition, the government acknowledges that time is of the essence and thus commits to effectuate the concession, restoration and restructuring in accordance with the following principles to allow for sufficient time to enable completion by the compact end date of the infrastructure works and IT project implementations which are planned to be funded with the compact tranche 2 funding.
Okay, then this is important. There are two key phrases here that struck me when I read it: concession restoration and restructuring. So according to the Americans, the general principle hovers around these two key points: that there's going to be the restoration of the PDS concession, and second, there's going to be a restructuring of it. So it's not as if the Americans say restructure and keep PDS as it is currently structured, but restore and restructure.
And then again, there's a reminder that time is of essence because in doing all of this, you have to be aware of the compact date and the fact that there is some outstanding fund of about 190 million that you need to meet some conditions in order to access.
So what are these principles that the Americans talk of? And
so first it says maintain the framework and the terms and conditions of the existing transaction agreements unless otherwise agreed to by all parties. It goes on to say that ensure at least the same level of investment commitment in the distribution sector as was committed to in the existing shareholders agreement. And this is approximately 580.96 million over a 5-year period.
And this is the key investment that we were expecting the PDS, the consortium, to put in.
Yes.
And this is important. But the first is also important: maintain the framework and the terms and conditions of existing. So in other words, the existing transaction agreements approved by Parliament, the Americans expect that we will maintain that framework and the terms and conditions.
If you are going to change it, the parties to this agreement must agree to it.
Okay.
It goes on to say that maintain Meralco in its current roles of financial lead shareholder, operation lead shareholder, and developing country lead shareholder.
Now, that's a very important point, yes, that we need to highlight.
Decided to participate in the PDS consortium.
Just to note, what you're reading is the Americans saying this.
Yes.
In their letter to us.
Yes.
What is it?
And so if you read the part, so let me take that point again. It says maintain Meralco in its current roles of financial lead shareholder, operation lead shareholder, and developing country lead shareholder. Then the bottom part of the letter has a notation there, so it explains what they're referring to in terms of Meralco. And so it makes the point that Meralco decided to participate in the PDS consortium, which was incorporated on 29 June 2018 through Meridian Power Ventures Limited, a company registered in Hong Kong, which Meralco owns 100%.
Now, this is a very important point because it became a subject of some controversy last week when the minority held this press conference. And they made the point then that this Meridian Power Ventures is a new introduction. That's somehow an unknown company. That somehow has recently been established. And when government was in the process of handing the PDS deal to it. And also whole controversy that the minority made of this. The Americans have confirmed what we've ourselves established through a simple check on the Philippine Stock Exchange, which is that the Meralco won this particular bid through Meridian Power Ventures. So the Meridian Power Ventures, as we indicated last week, was known to this agreement, according to the Americans, according to what the Philippine Stock Exchange had indicated. And this discounts a bit of the position as articulated by the minority last week.
Yes.
The fourth principle.
It says facilitate the equity participation of potential Ghanaian institutional investors in the transaction in a fair and transparent manner while handling the rights of the existing shareholders, the local ownership requirements and the transfer restrictions of the GSA.
Let's break this down a bit more. the Americans are telling us, and based on the principle they agree on, the government should facilitate the equity participation of potential Ghanaian institutional investors, but also respect the rights of the existing shareholders, the Ghanaian shareholders, the Miracle, all of them. Respect their rights, but facilitate an increase restructuring of the process to bring other people on board, but do not take the existing shareholders out. Respect them.
Yes.
Right? But it goes on to explain further what it means by
potential Ghanaian institutional investors.
Yeah.
And so examples are given here. We are told that the potential local institutional shareholders include entities such as the Ghana Infrastructure and Investments Fund.
Which means that it's possible that the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund will become, possibly if it's restructured, a shareholder in the PDS, in the PDS, the concession arrangement.
It also has the Ghanaian Pensions Fund. It's also listed here. That's the Social Security and National Insurance Trust.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the Social Security and National Insurance Trust and the Ghanaian Pensions Funds as an interim step with a longer term view towards effecting broad-based local participation through an initial public offering, an IPO, an employee stock ownership plan. That's post restructuring and when market conditions permit. And so not just about bringing in the new institutions. Beyond that, also the expectation is that within a longer term there should be an IPO to bring more people on board.
That means that all of us can buy a share or a stake in the concession arena in PDS, if so wish. But another key point here that just to re-emphasize is that the Americans are not opposed to a restructuring of the existing PDS arrangement. What they are opposed to is completely taking out the existing shareholders. They say respect their rights, but whilst you do that, you're allowed to bring in other shareholders. And they say we are not even opposed to bring in other shareholders like the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, SNIT, the Ghanaian Pension Funds, and even in the long term, you can even do an IPO where we can all buy shares in PDS and own part of it. That is the roadmap. But then they go on to tell us, if we don't do these things that they expect of us, there will be sanctions. Or there are benefits to doing them. If you don't do them too, the opposite applies, which is the benefits that you expect won't happen. Let's go through that.
And so there's actually a table that talks about what government has to do. Then there is a box for a deadline. Then there is a corresponding MCC action.
So in other words, government, you do this, and Americans will also do that. If you don't do this, you're not getting that. Let's go.
So the first thing that government is required to do is to formally announce the reinstatement of the PDS concession rights under the transaction agreement.
And this must be done by the deadline of October 30th, 2019, hard deadline, which is like, 2 weeks away?
Yes.
Yeah. Or less than 2 weeks away.
Less than 2 weeks away, just some few days away. Today is the 21st, so just some 9 days away.
Yeah.
And in terms of what the MCC would have to do, they said the MCC will release to MEDA Tranche 2 funding and permit such funding to be committed to approved contracts under the Compact Multi-Year Financial Plan.
The amount there is $190 million. So if government formally announces the reinstatement of PDS concession rights by the 30th of October, we will get, American says, you will get the 130 million. It stands to reason that if we don't do this by this deadline, we will lose the $190 million that is still at stake. But that's not all we'll lose. Because there are other demands of us.
Yes, and it goes on to talk about those demands. These were the things that were suspended from PDS when government announced the detection of the fraud. So it talks about the fact that government has to lift the suspension of the lease and assignment agreement, the bulk supply agreement, and the government support agreement. So those are the three agreements that government is supposed to lift the suspension of by October 30.
Okay, same deadline,
2019. Then the final one says, cause the Energy Commission to lift the suspension of PDS retail supply license. This was also another license that government suspended when it said it had detected fraud.
That's
and
the
in terms
retail
of
supply
the retail
license,
supply license that allows them to engage in the sale of the prepaid, among others. And it goes on to say that once this is done, the MCC will authorize the resumption of activities toward the development of a regional compact involving Ghana. In fact, this morning when the Director of Communication for the Energy Ministry spoke on the Super Morning Show, he made a point that Ghana risk being penalized and in fact may miss out on the Compact 3 if they fail to exit this or deal with this agreement that has been suspended in a manner that meets the parties involved, including the MCC.
And the point you made there about if we do not do all these by 30th September, two things mainly: announce formally reinstatement of PDS. Second, get the Energy Commission to lift the suspension of retail supply. If we don't do this, we are not only going to lose 190 million. There is a Compact 3 that will lose huge amounts, huge U.S. taxpayer amounts there that Ghana could benefit. And in fact, I just pulled up from the MCC's own website. As of June 18, 2019, the vice president had already led a team that had already started discussions with the MCC in the hope of getting Ghana to participate or be included in the tranche 3, the regional compact. Again, so that conversation is already happening.
Yes.
The Americans are telling us that if we do not reinstate PDS and do not get Energy Commission to lift the retail supply suspension, we will not get it, in spite of the discussions that had gone on. But most importantly, who signed this particular letter?
So the letter is by Che Kim, Kyeh, K Kim, I guess. He's the title is the Principal Deputy Vice President, Department of Compact Operations, acknowledged and agreed as of the date first written above, and it's Ministry of Finance on behalf of the government of the Republic of Ghana by Ken Ofori-Atta, title Honorable Minister of Finance.
Okay, Joseph, thank you very much, because the NDC have been addressed a press conference which you attended. I want to bring in energy analyst and expert Mr. Kojo-Poku, who has been part of the civil society groups dealing with this compact arrangement, the concession arrangement, for some time now. He joins us on the telephone line right now. Mr. Poku, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
Hi, thank you, Evans. Good evening and good evening to your listeners.
Sorry to hold you on the line, but this document just dropped on our laps that we need to go through it. First of all, I hope you listen to the details of it. What's your initial reaction, knowing what you know already?
I think what is in the vein of this letter is, our letter to MCC is also dated the 18th of October.
Yes.
What is interesting for us to note is which one came first. Because I think the Ghana letter went after the MCC wrote their letter. I'm trying to confirm that for you.
No, I think you're right, because in fact the Ghana letter references this letter, doesn't reproduce it, but says that they were unhappy that it was communicating something. There was a meeting. I mean, just quoting from the finance minister's letter. And they thought that we had agreed something to the effect that we are going to get PDS out of the equation. But when this letter came, the Americans said, don't do that. And the finance minister refers that in his letter and said, this is not what we thought we agreed in that discussion. So you're right.
Well, yes. So basically, it goes to show that from my information, the finance minister was sent to the DC with a set of instructions. When he got there, the Americans had now come up with counter offer as against what has been agreed previously. And when the decision for the Americans to give us that letter was what necessitated the government issuing the termination. So the government really has now called the MCC their bluff and said that, look, it's our country, it's our asset, we are not going to abide by the way you want it to go. We think that this thing should not happen, and we've terminated it. So, I'm trying to get a much further information on it whilst I'm talking to you through my sources to see what the situation is. But I will be able to give you further information maybe later on when we speak. But it's interesting that the government has really called the bluff of the MCC, which is quite interesting.
And just to reiterate the point that you just made about the order, the sequence, in terms of these letters that had gone. I just pulled up the finance minister's letter, again on the same date, 18th October. And there's a part that says, we also wish to reiterate the position communicated to the CEO of the MCC by the President of Ghana during their meeting on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York on September 23rd, to the effect that the current concession had to be terminated in view of the facts as had come up. However, that every effort will be employed to ensure that a suitable replacement within the relevant entities will be found. And first of all, it is government view that a meeting between the CEO of MCC and the President of Ghana produced an understanding that the existing concession will be discontinued and a concession restoration and restructuring plan found. It is worth recalling that following this understanding, Mr. Concross and President, who is the CEO, shook hands and committed to expeditiously putting the understandings into effect. Following the meeting, however, MCC sent an implementation plan which, in our opinion, did not accurately reflect the outcome of the New York meeting. So that I guess puts the issue in context for you.
Yes, definitely. So yes, I mean, I'm happy. I'm very happy that the government has taken that stance against the MCC. Some of us are very disappointed the way MCC have gone about this. We thought they would be the senior in transparency and accountability. And for all that we have found and we've told them, and they still want us to reinstate PDS, it meets the eye. And I think later on we'll find out why the Americans are sticking to that position. But it's good.
Mm-hmm. But Mr. Poku, just a quick one. If you look at, there will be sanctions, and it's clear in this letter. 2 sanctions mainly. We're going to lose out on the 190 million by 30th of October, and will also not be included in the Compact 3. And I just indicated the Vice President led the team already, and they're discussing. They've already started discussions with Americans in an attempt for the Americans to include us in the Compact 3. Those are things that we'll lose. That's the punishment for calling their bluff. Is this worth it?
Well, I think at the MCC level, they think they can do that. I think MCC is just like an agency like MEDA in the United States. The president is the sovereign leader of this country. His colleague is the president of the United States of America. Now, I think after we Ghanaians have stood our grounds and done the right thing, the president can take it up with the president of the United States, and I'm 100% confident that the Trump that I know would really get Ghanaians back onto the third compact. I don't think we are going to suffer. I think it's something that at the MCC level, they have done, but I think when the diplomacy gets involved and the president is able to talk to the president of the United States, whole thing will be resolved. I don't think look, what do we Ghanaians want? Do we want a much better structured ECG, or do we want to be forced onto something that, look, we are not happy with? For me, I think every Ghanaian wants a much structured ECG. It's about time that we can stand up to the likes of the U.S. or agencies in the U.S. This is not a matter that I think the White House is involved. I mean, in Ghana, our president is involved in this because he's getting the briefing almost every day.
So what you're suggesting is that you expect the president to escalate this to the White House?
So yes, I think that is what will happen.
Okay. And very quickly also, if you read this letter, the Americans are also for a long-term initial public offering arrangement. They are also in favor of a Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund and SNIT and Ghana Pension Funds all being shareholders in the restructured PDS. Is that something that you are in favor of as well as somebody who participates in the process?
In the long term, you see, the Americans acknowledge there's a problem. Now, if you even look at the way they are making it sound like we can involve Ghana Investment and Promotion Infrastructure Fund and all that, initially they were against that. So for them to now turn around and make it look like we can do those things, for me, if you look at the RFQ, they clearly states that you cannot involve any company. The affidavits that were to be signed for the process, which was advised by IFC, clearly rules out companies like Snake and GIF taking part, because the affidavits that were to be signed by all parties involved in the compact could not have any government affiliation, because initially MEDA had weighed the option of Snake and all these companies taking involved, and then the MCC said no from initially. So I'm surprised that later they are giving concession to government that government can do those things. But for me, the good thing is that as a sovereign nation, our president and the team around him have stood up to the Americans and said no. But I think that it is at the MCC level. The MCC level is just like an agency like MEDA. I think the president can escalate this with the president of the United States, and the diplomacy will work, and I think Ghana will be back on the compact.
Mr. Pukwa, go on.
And not even lose out on the money that is left. I'm sure all that will be resolved.
Mr. Pukwa, I'm grateful that you joined us. As today all this has been happening, the NDC have also been addressing a news conference, and one of the key things they've asked for is for a forensic audit into the accounts of PDS.
We demand an immediate forensic audit of the accounts of PDS by an internationally reputable audit firm. And I'm saying internationally reputable audit firm. We are not referring to the MPP type of forensic audit where they put their party members, some of them living outside, to form shell companies and give them audit assignment and pay them free money. That is not what we are looking for. We are looking for proper and internationally reputable audit firm. And the total refund of all monies which have accrued or been collected by them from power consumers since 1st March 2019.
That is Joseph Ketia. There also at this particular press conference, it says Ghana can also progress, government cannot also progress with any tendering discussions without dealing with the issues of transparency, but also objecting to the government's express intention to do this with restrictive tendering.
The NDC holds the view that any attempt to select another concessionaire will be tantamount to fetching water with a leaking basket if those who caused this PDS mess are still at post. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we have stated time and again that this PDS issue is the biggest corruption scandal in the history of Ghana, and we shall be unrelenting in our demand for probity and accountability from the Akufo-Addo-led government. Without sounding boastful, this PDS expose further underscores the NDC's status as a more credible stakeholder in the fight against corruption and the protection of the public trust. Through our vigilance, and shall I say, the vigilance, particularly the vigilance of our members of parliament, we have saved Ghana billions of dollars in several corruption deals which have been perpetrated by the Akufo-Addo government, such as the fraudulent Ameri miscellaneous deal, the Oslo Chancery deal,